The morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting gentle patterns across Eleanor Wright's bedroom floor. She sat on the edge of her bed, her back straight despite her 78 years. The small clock on her nightstand ticked quietly, marking the passage of another day in a life that had grown increasingly quiet. Eleanor's gaze fell on the cream-colored envelope that had arrived in yesterday's mail. Her grandson Thomas had sent a handwritten note along with the wedding invitation. She picked it up again, her fingers tracing his familiar handwriting. "Grandma," the note read, "I know it's been years, but would you consider playing something at our reception? Your music is one of my earliest and most treasured memories. No pressure, but it would mean the world to me and Beth." A soft sigh escaped her lips as she placed the note back on the nightstand. Her joints ached this morning, the arthritis in her hands particularly troublesome after yesterday's rain. She flexed her fingers slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her knuckles. The piano that occupied the corner of her living room had gathered a thin layer of dust. She played occasionally, of course, simple pieces when her hands felt good or on days when memories of her teaching years grew too powerful to ignore. But she hadn't performed for anyone except her tabby cat in nearly 20 years, not since Frank passed away. Eleanor rose slowly and walked to the bathroom, where she studied her reflection with a critical eye. Her once vibrant auburn hair had faded to a soft silver. Lines had etched themselves around her blue eyes and the corners of her mouth, marks of laughter and sorrow, of a life fully lived. "You're being silly," she told her reflection. "Thomas only asked to be polite. They don't really want an old woman fumbling through a piece at their beautiful wedding." But as she went about her morning routine, making tea, feeding the cat, watering the African violets on the windowsill, Thomas's note kept calling to her. She had taught piano for over 40 years, instilling a love of music in hundreds of students. Thomas had been different, though. From the age of 4, he had shown real promise, real passion. Saturday mornings, he would arrive at her house an hour before his lesson time, eager to show her what he'd practiced, his small fingers surprisingly nimble on the keys. By mid-morning, Eleanor found herself standing before the piano. She lifted the fallboard, revealing keys that had yellowed slightly with age. The piano itself, a Yamaha upright she and Frank had purchased when they were newlyweds, remained in good condition. She'd never neglected its care, even during the years when playing had become too painful, both physically and emotionally. She lowered herself onto the bench and placed her hands on the keys without pressing down. The familiar position brought comfort, like greeting an old friend. Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering how she used to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, as Thomas sat beside her on the bench, his eyes wide with wonder. "That one's magic. Grandma," he'd say every time, with a tentative touch. Eleanor began to play the opening notes of the piece. Her fingers felt stiff and uncooperative, and she winced at a wrong note. The once fluid movement was now halting and uncertain. After a few measures, she stopped, her hands falling to her lap. "Who am I kidding?" she whispered to the empty room. The telephone rang, startling both Eleanor and her cat. She rose from the piano bench and crossed the room to answer it. "Hello? Grandma. Did you get my note?" Thomas's voice came through warm and eager. "I know it's asking a lot, but Beth and I were talking last night, and we both agreed there's nothing that would make our day more special than having you play." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "Oh, Thomas, I'm not sure. It's been a very long time since I've played for anyone. My hands aren't what they used to be." "Your hands are perfect," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Remember when I was little and you told me that music doesn't come from fingers but from the heart?" She did remember. She'd said those words countless times to nervous students before recitals. "The wedding is still 6 weeks away," Thomas continued. "Just think about it, please." After they hung up, Eleanor returned to the piano. She played a simple C major scale, slowly and deliberately. Her fingers protested, but she continued, moving through each scale she had taught to beginners for decades. By the time she reached G minor, her hands had begun to loosen, the movement becoming more natural. That afternoon, Eleanor called her doctor. "Is there anything more I can do for the arthritis in my hands?" she asked. "I've been invited to play piano at my grandson's wedding." Dr. Chen's voice was encouraging. "Regular gentle exercise is actually good for arthritis. Start slowly, use warm compresses before playing, and we could try adjusting your medication slightly. When's the wedding? 6 weeks from Saturday. That's plenty of time to prepare, Mrs. Wright, just don't overdo it. That evening, Eleanor pulled out her old music books, the pages yellowed with age. She found her copy of Clair de Lune, the margins filled with her own notations from years of teaching it. As she set the music on the piano stand, determination began to replace her doubt. She thought of all the times she had encouraged frightened students before their first recitals. Music is a gift, she would tell them. When you play from your heart, that gift touches everyone who listens. Could she take her own advice after all these years? The next morning, Eleanor developed a routine. She soaked her hands in warm water, carefully dried them, then applied the arthritis cream Dr. Chen had recommended. She did the gentle stretching exercises the doctor had shown her years ago, but that she had gradually abandoned. Then she played, starting with simple scales and exercises before attempting Clair de Lune again. The piece was challenging, fluid and delicate, requiring both technical skill and emotional depth. She played the first page slowly, stopping whenever her fingers stumbled, returning to the difficult passages again and again. By the end of the week, Mrs. Patel from next door knocked on her door. "I hope you don't mind," she said, "but I've been enjoying hearing you play again." "It's been too long." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "I'm practicing for my grandson's wedding. I'm terribly rusty." "Nonsense," Mrs. Patel said firmly. "It's beautiful. My mother played piano back in Mumbai. When you play, it reminds me of her." Each day, Eleanor added 15 minutes to her practice time. She found that on rainy days she needed to soak her hands twice, but the music was worth the effort. Some passages came back easily, muscle memory taking over despite the years of neglect. Others required patient repetition, her old teacher's discipline returning as she worked through difficult measures. In the evenings, she would sit with a cup of tea, the music playing in her mind as she visualized her fingers moving across the keys. Frank used to tease her about this habit. "Eleanor's playing piano in her head again," he'd tell friends when she grew quiet at dinner parties. That's how she solved problems in her teaching, just closed her eyes and played the music in her mind. 3 weeks before the wedding, Thomas called again. "How's the practice coming, Grandma?" "Some days are better than others," she admitted. "But I'm working on it every day. Beth and I came up with a backup plan," he said. "If you're not comfortable playing live, we could have you record it beforehand and we'll play the recording." Eleanor felt a flicker of relief, followed immediately by disappointment. A recording would be easier, safer, but it wouldn't be the same as being there, feeling the music in the moment, sharing that gift directly. "Let me keep practicing," she said. "I'll decide closer to the date." That afternoon, she played through the entire piece for the first time without stopping. It wasn't perfect, her tempo was inconsistent, and she missed several notes in the challenging middle section. But she finished. The final delicate notes hung in the air of her apartment, and Eleanor realized she was smiling. The next day, she called Thomas back. "I'll do it," she said simply. "For you, I'll play." 2 weeks before the wedding, Eleanor's daughter Lisa visited. She stood in the doorway of the living room listening as her mother played. "Mom, that's beautiful," she said when Eleanor finished. "I haven't heard you play like that since before Dad died." "I'm still making mistakes," Eleanor said, flexing her fingers. "No one will notice," Lisa assured her. "They'll just hear the beauty of it." "Thomas will notice," Eleanor said with a small smile. He always had a good ear. As the wedding approached, Eleanor's confidence grew. Her hands still ached, especially in the mornings, but the music had awakened something in her that had been dormant for too long. She found herself looking forward to her practice sessions, sometimes playing well into the evening until Mrs. Patel would gently tap on the wall, their signal that it was getting late. The night before the wedding, Eleanor played Clair de Lune one last time in the privacy of her apartment. Her cat sat on top of the piano, yellow eyes half closed in contentment. As the final notes faded, Eleanor felt ready. Whatever happened tomorrow, whether her fingers cooperated or not, she had already given herself a precious gift, the return of music to her life. She carefully packed her sheet music into a folder, though she now knew the piece by heart. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For tonight, the music was enough. The morning of Thomas's wedding dawned clear and bright. Eleanor woke earlier than usual, her sleep interrupted by dreams of playing piano in front of strangers. She sat up slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness in her joints that accompanied each new day. Today's the day, she murmured to her cat, who stretched lazily at the foot of her bed. She'd named him Mozart years ago, a small joke that only another music teacher might appreciate. Eleanor went through her morning routine with extra care. She soaked her hands in warm water with Epsom salts the way Dr. Chen had suggested. The arthritis in her fingers had improved somewhat over the past 6 weeks of daily practice. But she knew from experience that performance days required additional preparation. After her hands were warmed and stretched, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a slice of toast. The butterflies in her stomach made it difficult to eat, but she forced herself to take small bites. She needed her strength today. Her daughter Lisa had offered to help her get ready, but Eleanor had gently refused. "I've been dressing myself for 78 years, she'd said with a smile. "I think I can manage one more day." The truth was, she needed these quiet morning hours to center herself, to prepare mentally for what was to come. At 9 o'clock, Eleanor opened her closet and removed the dress she'd chosen for the occasion. It was a simple design in soft blue silk that Lisa had helped her find. "It matches your eyes, Mom," Lisa had said in the store. The color reminded Eleanor of the dress she'd worn to her own wedding reception, though that one had been much more elaborate, with layers of tulle and tiny pearl buttons down the back. She laid the dress carefully on the bed and went to her jewelry box. The pearls that had been her mother's were nestled inside, still in their original velvet case. She hadn't worn them in years, saving them for special occasions that had become fewer and farther between as she aged. By 10:30, Eleanor was dressed, her silver hair arranged neatly, a touch of pink lipstick adding color to her face. She studied her reflection in the mirror and saw not just the 78-year-old woman she had become, but glimpses of the young piano teacher she had been, the mother who had raised 2 children, the wife who had loved Frank for 43 years. "You can do this," she told her reflection firmly. She picked up her handbag and the folder containing her music. Though she now knew Claire de Lune by heart, having the music with her was a comfort, a security blanket of sorts. Lisa arrived at 11, looking elegant in a deep purple dress. "Mom, you look beautiful," she said, embracing Eleanor carefully. "Not too old-fashioned?" Eleanor asked, smoothing the skirt of her dress. "Timeless?" Lisa corrected her with a warm smile. "Thomas will be so proud." The drive to the hotel where the wedding would be held took 45 minutes. Lisa kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling Eleanor about her granddaughter Rachel's college plans and her grandson Michael's baseball team. Eleanor was grateful for the distraction, though her mind kept returning to the piece she would play. Her fingers tapped the rhythm silently against her purse. The hotel was grander than Eleanor had expected, with a sweeping circular driveway and uniformed staff opening car doors. Lisa pulled up to the entrance. "I'll park and meet you inside," she told Eleanor. "The ceremony is in the garden and the reception will be in the grand ballroom." Eleanor nodded, suddenly feeling very small. Young people in beautiful clothes were arriving, laughing and talking with the easy confidence of youth. She clutched her music folder a bit tighter and made her way inside. The hotel lobby was a soaring space of marble and crystal, with arrangements of fresh flowers that filled the air with their sweet scent. Eleanor followed the signs to the garden, where white chairs had been set up in rows facing a floral arch. A young woman with a clipboard approached her. "Are you a guest of the bride or groom?" she asked with a professional smile. "I'm the groom's grandmother," Eleanor replied. "Eleanor Wright." The woman's expression warmed immediately. "Mrs. Wright, Thomas mentioned you'd be playing at the reception. It's so wonderful to meet you. Let me show you to your seat. We've reserved a spot in the front row for family." Eleanor was led to a chair decorated with a small bunch of white roses. Other guests were filling in the rows behind her, their chatter creating a buzz of excitement. She sat carefully, placing her handbag and music folder on her lap. A middle-aged couple took the seats next to her, the woman dressed in an elaborate floral outfit with a matching hat. "You must be Thomas's grandmother," the woman said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Beth's Aunt Patty, and this is my husband, Jim. We've heard so much about you." Eleanor shook their hands, surprised. "You have?" "Oh, yes," Patty nodded enthusiastically. "Thomas tells everyone about his grandmother, the piano teacher. He says you're the reason he loves music." A warm glow spread through Eleanor's chest. She hadn't known that Thomas spoke of her to others, that he still credited her with his love of music. He had stopped taking lessons when he was 14, busy with school and sports and friends. She'd assumed that piano had become just another childhood activity left behind. Before she could respond, music began to play, not piano, but a string quartet positioned to one side of the garden. The guests quieted and turned their attention to the back of the aisle. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Thomas looked so grown up in his dark suit, his face alight with joy as he watched Beth walk toward him. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes as the couple exchanged vows. It seemed like only yesterday that Thomas had been a little boy sitting beside her on the piano bench, his legs too short to reach the pedals. After the ceremony, guests were directed to the ballroom for the reception. Eleanor followed the crowd, Lisa appearing at her elbow to guide her through the throng. "The piano is already set up," Lisa told her. "Do you want to check it before the reception starts?" Eleanor nodded, her throat suddenly dry. They made their way to the far end of the ballroom where a glossy black grand piano waited on a small raised platform. It was far more elegant than her humble upright at home. "May I?" she asked a nearby staff member who nodded. Eleanor approached the piano with reverence. Grand pianos had always seemed like living creatures to her, with personalities and temperaments all their own. She sat on the bench, adjusting its height, and placed her fingers on the keys without pressing down, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. She played a few quiet chords, testing the action and the tone. The piano responded beautifully, the sound rich and resonant in the large room. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, letting her fingers find their way through the opening measures of Clair de Lune. The piano seemed to sigh with pleasure under her touch. "It's perfect," she told Lisa, who stood nearby watching with a soft smile. "Just like you," her daughter replied. As guests began to fill the ballroom, finding their assigned tables, Eleanor was led to the family table near the front. Thomas and Beth had not yet made their entrance, but their parents were seated together, already deep in conversation. Beth's mother leaned across the table toward Eleanor. "Thomas tells us you're going to play. What a wonderful personal touch for the reception." Eleanor smiled, though her heart was pounding. "I hope everyone enjoys it." "I'm sure it will be lovely," the woman said kindly. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Eleanor accepted a glass but didn't drink, not wanting anything to dull her senses before she played. She watched as the room filled with guests in beautiful clothes, their jewelry catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. The wedding planner, a brisk woman in a headset, approached the microphone at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for the first time as husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas and Beth Wright." The room erupted in applause as Thomas and Beth entered, holding hands and beaming. They made their way to the center of the dance floor for their first dance, swaying together to a romantic ballad that Eleanor didn't recognize. When the dance ended, Thomas took the microphone. "Thank you all for coming today," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Beth and I are so grateful to be surrounded by family and friends on the happiest day of our lives." He paused, looking around the room until his eyes found Eleanor. "We have a special treat for you today. My grandmother, Eleanor Wright, taught me to love music when I was just a little boy. She's agreed to play for us this afternoon, and I can't think of a more meaningful gift." All eyes turned to Eleanor, and she felt her cheeks flush. Thomas crossed the room to her table and extended his hand. "Ready, Grandma?" he asked softly, for her ears alone. Eleanor took a deep breath and placed her hand in his. "Ready," she whispered back. As Thomas led her to the piano, Eleanor felt a curious calm settle over her. The nervousness that had plagued her all day began to recede. This was Thomas, her beloved grandson. This was music, her lifelong companion. What could be more natural than bringing the two together on this special day? She settled herself at the piano, adjusted the bench one last time, and placed her music before her, though she doubted she would need it. The room quieted as guests turned their attention toward her. Eleanor looked up and found Thomas standing nearby, his expression full of love and confidence in her. She smiled at him, then turned to the keys, all other faces fading from her awareness. Her fingers found their places and she began to play. Eleanor's fingers touched the keys, the familiar sensation grounding her despite the unfamiliar surroundings. The first notes of Clair de Lune floated tentatively into the air. She had played this piece countless times over the past 6 weeks, but this moment was different. These notes weren't just for her apartment walls or her cat. They were for Thomas, for Beth, for everyone gathered in this glittering ballroom. The chatter hadn't died down yet. A waiter called for another bottle of champagne. Someone laughed loudly at a nearby table. A young woman in a bright yellow dress continued her animated conversation, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. Most guests hadn't even noticed that Eleanor had begun to play. For a heartbeat, doubt crept in. Perhaps Thomas had been mistaken to ask her. Perhaps she had been foolish to agree. Her fingers faltered slightly on a passage that should have been effortless. Then she caught sight of Thomas. He stood at the edge of the dance floor, Beth beside him, both watching her with expressions of pure anticipation. Thomas gave her a small nod of encouragement, the same nod she had given him before his first recital when he was 7 years old. Eleanor took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She didn't need to see the keys. They were extensions of her fingers, of her heart. She let go of the ballroom, of the chattering guests, of her own nervousness, and surrendered to the music. The piece began to flow more smoothly, her fingers finding their way through the familiar melody with growing confidence. The delicate, dreamy notes of Debussy's masterpiece began to assert themselves against the background noise. A strange thing started to happen. The clinking of glasses grew less frequent. The laughter quieted. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eleanor didn't notice at first, lost as she was in the music. But as she reached the middle section where the composition deepens and intensifies, she became aware of a change in the atmosphere. She opened her eyes. The ballroom had fallen silent. Faces were turned toward her, expressions rapt. Even the servers had paused, trays balanced carefully as they listened. Eleanor's heart quickened, but her fingers didn't falter. If anything, they moved with greater purpose now, drawing out the emotion in each phrase, each chord progression. There was a freedom in being watched, she realized. A permission to express herself fully, to share the music as it was meant to be shared, not just as notes on a page, but as a living, breathing thing that connected them all. As the piece built toward its climax, Eleanor felt a curious sensation. The arthritis pain that had been her constant companion these past years seemed to recede. Her fingers, which had been stiff that morning, now moved with a fluidity she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't that the pain had vanished completely, but rather that it no longer mattered. The music had become more important than the discomfort. She saw a young man at a nearby table watching her with his mouth slightly open. She recognized him as one of the guests who had been laughing earlier when she first sat down. Now he leaned forward in his chair, utterly absorbed. Beside him, his date dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Eleanor's body swayed gently with the rhythm as her hands moved across the keys. She had almost forgotten what this felt like. This conversation between musician and audience, this shared journey through sound and emotion. It had been her entire life once. Before retirement, before Frank's death, before the quiet days had stretched into quiet years. The music flowed through her like a river, carrying her toward the final ethereal passages of the piece. These closing measures were perhaps the most difficult technically, with their delicate arpeggios that needed to sound effortless, like water droplets falling into a still pond. Today, though, they came easily to her, as if the piano itself was helping her, responding to her touch with exactly the right resistance, the perfect tone, as she played the final notes, letting them shimmer and fade into silence. Eleanor felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in years. The last note hung in the air for a perfect moment, and then dissolved into thunderous applause. The room erupted with sound, so sudden and enthusiastic that Eleanor was startled. People were standing, clapping with genuine appreciation. Lisa, at the family table, was wiping away tears. Beth's parents were smiling broadly, looking at her with new respect. Thomas rushed to the piano, his face alight with joy and pride. He helped Eleanor to her feet and hugged her gently. "That was beautiful, Grandma," he whispered in her ear. "Even better than I remembered." Beth joined them, her wedding dress rustling as she moved. "Mrs. Wright, that was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your gift with us today." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. "Thank you for asking me," she said simply. As Thomas guided her back to her seat, guests approached to express their admiration. An elderly gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit stopped her with a gentle touch on her arm. "Madam, I've heard Claire de Lune performed by professionals around the world, but never with such feeling. You made an old man very happy today. A middle-aged woman squeezed her hand. My daughter is taking piano lessons and she gets so frustrated. May I tell her about you? About how beautifully you play at 78? She needs to understand that music is a lifelong journey. The young man who had been watching so intently made his way through the crowd. Up close, Eleanor could see he was barely older than Thomas, perhaps in his late 20s. He stood before her, shifting his weight nervously from one foot to the other. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. "I want to apologize. When they said someone's grandma was going to play the piano, I made a joke about it to my girlfriend. I was a real jerk. And then you played like that and I just..." He trailed off, clearly embarrassed. Eleanor smiled gently. "Music has a way of surprising us," she said. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. My grandmother used to play hymns on an old upright," he continued. "After she passed, no one in the family wanted the piano. We let the movers take it away." His eyes were sad. "Listening to you made me remember her hands on the keys, how safe I felt sitting next to her on the bench. I wish now we'd kept that piano." Eleanor reached out and briefly touched his hand. "It's not too late to make music part of your life again," she said. He nodded thoughtfully and rejoined his girlfriend, who gave Eleanor a warm smile. The wedding reception continued around her. The meal was served, speeches were given, and the cake was cut with appropriate ceremony. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor found herself enjoying the celebration more than she had expected. The tension that had built up before her performance had dissolved, leaving her relaxed and content. Lisa brought her a plate of food. "You should eat something, Mom. You've barely touched anything all day." Eleanor realized she was right, and surprisingly, she was hungry. The strawberry that she bit into was the sweetest she had tasted in years, the champagne effervescent on her tongue. As the dancing began, Thomas's father, Eleanor's son-in-law David, approached her table. He bowed slightly and extended his hand. "May I have this dance, Eleanor?" She laughed, surprised. "Oh, David, I don't think so. My dancing days are long behind me." "Nonsense," he said with a grin. "Anyone who can play piano like that can surely manage a simple waltz." "One dance for Thomas's sake." Eleanor hesitated, then placed her hand in his. "One dance," she agreed. "But don't blame me if your toes get stepped on." David led her to the edge of the dance floor where the crowd was thinner. The band was playing something slow and sweet, easy to follow. Eleanor felt awkward at first, trying to remember steps she hadn't used in decades, but David was a good leader. And gradually she relaxed into the rhythm. "That was quite a performance," he said as they moved together. "Lisa told me you'd been practicing for weeks." Eleanor nodded. "I was terrified I'd make a mess of it." "Thomas never doubted you for a second," David said. "He told everyone his grandma was a world-class pianist who was going to blow us all away." Eleanor chuckled. "Hardly world-class. You were to him," David said simply. "And after today, I think everyone here would agree." As the dance ended, Eleanor noticed the young pianist from the band watching her with interest. When David escorted her back to her table, the young man approached. "Mrs. Wright? I'm Pete, the band leader. That was some playing earlier. Classical isn't usually my thing, but man, you made that piano sing." He hesitated, then added, "We're taking a break in a bit. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about technique? I'm mostly self-taught, and there's this passage in a song we do that's been giving me trouble." Eleanor found herself drawn into a technical discussion about hand positioning and wrist tension that lasted through the band's break and attracted two other musicians who listened intently. "You should teach," Pete said finally, seriously. "There are people who would pay good money for lessons from someone who plays like you." Eleanor was about to dismiss the idea when she stopped herself. Why not? She had the time. She certainly had the experience. And today had reminded her how much she loved sharing music with others. "Perhaps I will," she said, surprised to find she meant it. Later, as the reception began to wind down, Thomas found her again. "How are you holding up, Grandma? Not too tired?" "Surprisingly, no," she answered truthfully. "I'm having a wonderful time." He sat beside her, loosening his tie. "You were the hit of the wedding, you know. Everyone's been talking about you. Beth's cousin even recorded your performance on her phone. She's promised to send me the video." Eleanor felt a moment of alarm. "Oh dear, I hope I don't see all my mistakes magnified." Thomas laughed. "There weren't any mistakes, Grandma. It was perfect. He took her hand in his. Thank you. This was the best wedding gift we could have asked for. As the evening deepened and guests began to leave, Eleanor sat contentedly, watching the remaining couples sway on the dance floor. The day that had begun with such anxiety had transformed into something unexpectedly wonderful. She felt more alive than she had in years. Ready to go, Mom? Lisa appeared beside her, car keys in hand. Eleanor nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. Not the heavy exhaustion she had feared, but a pleasant weariness. The satisfying fatigue that comes from giving your best. Yes, she said, rising to her feet. I'm ready. But as they walked toward the exit, Eleanor knew that in another way, she was just beginning. A week after the wedding, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table with a cup of morning tea, reading through the local newspaper. The gentle morning light filtered through her lace curtains, casting patterns on the worn wooden table. Mozart, her cat, lounged in a patch of sunlight nearby. The phone rang, its shrill tone breaking the peaceful silence. Eleanor reached for it, expecting Lisa's daily check-in call. Hello, Mrs. Wright? This is Pete Jackson from the band at Thomas's wedding. Eleanor was surprised. Oh, hello. How did you get my number? Thomas gave it to me, Pete explained. I hope that's okay. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about teaching. I wasn't just being polite, you know. I've been thinking about it all week. Eleanor shifted in her chair. That's very kind, but I have this friend who runs a small music store downtown, Pete continued eagerly. They have a teaching room in the back with a decent upright piano. They've been looking for a classical instructor for ages. When I told him about you, he practically begged me for your contact information. I'm not sure, Eleanor said hesitantly. It's been a very long time since I taught regularly. Would you at least meet with him? His name's Roy, and he's a good guy. No pressure, just a conversation. Eleanor thought about the wedding, about how alive she had felt playing for an audience again, about the young man who had apologized to her and spoken of his grandmother's piano. All right, she agreed finally. I can meet with him. 2 days later, Eleanor stood outside Harmony House, a modest storefront with a display window featuring guitars, violins, and a small electronic keyboard. She smoothed her skirt nervously before pushing open the door. The shop smelled of wood polish and new sheet music. A bell tinkled as she entered, and a bearded man in his 50s looked up from behind the counter. Can I help you? He asked with a friendly smile. I'm Eleanor Wright. I believe Pete Jackson called you about me. The man's face lit up. Mrs. Wright. Yes, of course. I'm Roy Patel. It's a pleasure to meet you. He came around the counter to shake her hand. Pete hasn't stopped talking about your playing since the wedding. Roy led her through the shop to a back room where a walnut upright piano stood against one wall. It was an older model but well-maintained. This is our teaching space, Roy explained. We have students coming in for guitar, violin, and drums, but we've lacked a good piano teacher for years. Our last one moved to Florida 6 months ago, and we've had parents asking when we'll find a replacement. Eleanor approached the piano and ran her fingers lightly over the keys, playing a quick scale to test the action. The piano had a warm, mellow tone that pleased her. How many students did your previous teacher have? She asked. About 15 regulars, ranging from beginners to intermediate. A few adults, but mostly kids. Roy watched her carefully. Pete says you taught for over 40 years? 43, Eleanor nodded. From my 20s until I was 65. Would you play something for me? Roy asked. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear you. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before sitting on the bench. She chose a short Chopin nocturne, one that showcased feeling over technical fireworks. As she played, she was aware of Roy listening intently, his eyes closed. When she finished, he opened his eyes and smiled. That was beautiful, Mrs. Wright. You have a rare gift for making the piano sing. Thank you, she said simply. So what do you think? Roy gestured around the room. Could you see yourself teaching here? Even just a few students to start? Eleanor looked at the piano, at the small but cozy room with its music stands and method books. She thought of her quiet apartment, the days that sometimes stretched too long. I think, she said slowly, that I might like to try. Over the next month, Eleanor began with just 3 students, all beginners recommended by Roy. She taught on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, sessions that left her tired but oddly invigorated. 8-year-old Lily was her youngest student, a bright-eyed child with perpetually untied shoelaces and remarkable focus for her age. Retired postal worker Bob had decided to learn piano as part of his bucket list and approached each lesson with determination, despite his clumsy fingers. And there was Andrea, a shy teenager who had been taught by ear by her father but wanted to learn to read music properly. Eleanor found herself looking forward to lessons, planning exercises tailored to each student's abilities and temperament. She woke up thinking about how to explain hand positioning to Bob, or what piece might draw Andrea out of her shell. One Thursday afternoon, as Lily was gathering her books after her lesson, the girl's mother lingered by the door. "Mrs. Wright, I just wanted to tell you what a difference you've made for Lily. Her previous teacher was much younger, but Lily didn't connect with her at all. She talks about you constantly." Eleanor felt a warm glow of pride. "Lily's a joy to teach. She has a good ear. She told me you were teaching her a special song." Eleanor nodded. "The first part of Claire de Lune. It's simplified, of course, but she's doing wonderfully with it." As May turned to June, word spread. Roy began fielding calls from parents, interested in piano lessons with the older lady who plays so beautifully. Eleanor found herself adding a third, teaching day to accommodate new students. Pete stopped by one afternoon as she was finishing a lesson with Andrea. "Hey, Mrs. W." He greeted her with his usual enthusiasm. "How's the teaching going?" "Quite well, thank you." Eleanor smiled, packing up her music. "Though I've told you to call me Eleanor. Sorry, old habits. Teachers are always Mrs. in my mind." He leaned against the doorframe. "Listen, I have a proposition for you. Our regular pianist can't make a gig this weekend. His mother's in the hospital. It's a garden party, very low-key, just background music while people mingle. Any chance you'd fill in?" Eleanor's immediate reaction was to refuse. Playing at Thomas's wedding had been one thing. Playing professionally was quite another. But before she could decline, Pete added, "It's mostly classic standards, nothing too wild. And honestly, you'd be doing me a huge favor." Eleanor thought about it. "What kind of standards?" "Gershwin, Porter, that kind of thing. Stuff from the Great American Songbook." He pulled sheet music from his bag. "I brought some of the arrangements we use if you want to look them over." The music was indeed familiar. Songs Eleanor had played countless times over the years. The arrangements were straightforward, nothing she couldn't handle. "When is this garden party?" "Saturday afternoon, 2 to 5. Pete looked hopeful. "It pays, of course." 3 days later, Eleanor found herself seated at a glossy black baby grand on a flagstone patio. The garden party was at a large home in the suburbs, the yard transformed with fairy lights and flower arrangements. Well-dressed guests mingled with champagne flutes in hand. She began with, "Someone to watch over me," her fingers finding the familiar chords easily. The music floated through the garden, providing a pleasant backdrop to the conversations around her. No one was really listening, not the way they had at the wedding, but that was fine. This was different. She was providing ambiance, not a performance. As she played through her set list, Eleanor found herself enjoying the experience. There was something freeing about being background music, about playing without the weight of expectation. She added embellishments to the arrangements, let herself play with tempo and dynamics in ways she might not have dared in a formal recital. After an hour, a woman in an elegant navy dress approached the piano during a break. "You play beautifully," she said. "Are you with Pete's band regularly?" "No, I'm just filling in," Eleanor explained. "Well, you're wonderful. I'm hosting a charity luncheon next month. Would you be available to play? It would be a 2-hour commitment, similar to today." By the time the garden party ended, Eleanor had 3 more bookings: the charity luncheon, a retirement celebration, and an anniversary party. Pete was delighted. "Told you," he said as they packed up. "People love your playing. You could do this regularly if you wanted." Eleanor laughed. "At my age, I'm not looking to start a new career." "Who said anything about a career? Just play when you want with who you want. No pressure." As summer progressed, Eleanor found a rhythm to her new life. She taught 3 days a week at Harmony House, played occasional weekend gigs with or without Pete's band, and still had time for herself, for reading and gardening and visits with her family. Lisa stopped by one evening in late July, bringing dinner and curious about her mother's new activities. "I hardly see you these days," she teased as they sat on Eleanor's small balcony. "You're busier than I am." "Hardly," Eleanor replied. "But I am enjoying myself." Lisa studied her mother's face. You look different, Mom. Younger, somehow. It's just having something to do, people to talk to. It's more than that. Lisa reached across the table to squeeze her mother's hand. You found your passion again. Do you know how rare that is? Especially she stopped herself, at my age. Eleanor finished with a smile. It's all right to say it, dear. I'm 78 and not likely to forget it. She looked out over the small garden below. But you're right. I did find something I thought I'd lost. Or perhaps it found me. Later that night, after Lisa had gone home, Eleanor sat at her own piano. Mozart jumped up beside her, settling into his usual spot. She began to play, not Debussy or Chopin, but one of the jazz standards from the garden party. Her left hand found a walking bass line, her right adding bluesy inflections to the melody. She thought about the past few months, about Thomas's wedding that had set everything in motion, about her new students and their small triumphs, about Pete and Roy and the unlikely second act they had helped her find. Eleanor had never been one for dramatic declarations or sweeping life changes. She had built her life on consistency, on the steady accumulation of days spent doing what she loved. Perhaps that was why this new chapter felt so right, not because it was different, but because it was a return to her truest self. The music flowed from her fingers, improvised now, no longer following anyone's arrangement but her own internal sense of where the melody should go. Mozart purred contentedly beside her, the sound blending with the piano in perfect harmony. Outside her window, the summer night was warm and full of possibilities. Eleanor played on, her hands strong and sure on the keys, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Autumn arrived with a paintbrush of gold and crimson, transforming the trees outside Eleanor's apartment window. The morning air carried a crisp edge that hinted at the coming winter. Eleanor wrapped her cardigan tighter as she sipped her tea, reviewing the day's teaching schedule she'd written in her neat handwriting. 3 months had passed since she'd begun teaching at Harmony House, and her student roster had grown to 12, a comfortable number that kept her busy without overwhelming her. She'd settled into a rhythm, finding joy in the progress of each student, from little Lily's growing confidence to Bob's determined mastery of basic scales. The phone rang, disrupting her thoughts. It was Thomas. Grandma! How are you? His voice carried the same warmth it always had, though there was something else there too. Excitement, perhaps. I'm well, dear. How are you and Beth? We're great. Listen, I'm calling because we're having a small gathering at our place next weekend. Our 3-month anniversary, if you can believe it. Nothing fancy, just dinner with close family. We'd love you to come. Of course I'll come, Eleanor said, smiling. Should I bring anything? Just yourself, Thomas said. Then, after a brief hesitation, and maybe your music fingers, Eleanor laughed. Thomas, you're not asking me to play again, are you? Well, she could hear the grin in his voice. Beth's parents will be there, and they keep talking about your performance at the wedding. They're convinced you're some famous pianist who's been hiding in obscurity. Plus, I got something recently that I think you'll want to see. After hanging up, Eleanor sat for a moment, feeling a familiar flutter of anticipation. Playing at the wedding had been a milestone, but performing for a small family gathering felt different, more intimate, in some ways more challenging. There would be no crowd to blend into, no distance between performer and audience. Yet the thought didn't fill her with dread, as it might have months ago. Instead, she found herself mentally selecting pieces that would be appropriate for the occasion. The following Saturday evening, Lisa drove Eleanor to Thomas and Beth's new apartment in the city. The autumn sky darkened early, and streetlights cast golden pools on the sidewalk as they arrived. Grandma! Thomas enveloped her in a hug as he opened the door. Come in, come in. Everyone's here. The apartment was modest but tastefully furnished with framed photographs from the wedding displayed on the walls. Beth greeted Eleanor warmly while Thomas took her coat. Mrs. Wright, it's wonderful to see you again, Beth's father said, crossing the room to shake her hand. Your playing at the wedding was the highlight of the day. Well, after the ceremony itself, of course, he added with a wink toward his daughter. Eleanor thanked him, slightly embarrassed by the attention. The conversation flowed easily as they settled around the dining table for the meal Beth had prepared. They talked about Thomas's new position at the architectural firm, Beth's graduate studies, and Lisa's children's college adventures. And what about you, Mrs. Wright? Beth's mother asked. Thomas tells us you've been teaching piano again. Eleanor nodded. Yes, at a small music shop downtown. It's been quite wonderful, actually. She's being modest, Thomas interjected. She's not just teaching. Pete's had her playing gigs all over town. Garden parties, charity events. Grandma's becoming the most sought-after pianist in the city. Oh, hardly, Eleanor protested, but she couldn't help smiling. It's true, Lisa added. Mom's busier now than she was before retirement. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where a digital keyboard had been set up in the corner. Not quite a grand piano, Thomas said apologetically, but it has weighted keys and decent sound. We thought maybe you'd play something for us. Before Eleanor could respond, he disappeared into the bedroom, returning with a small package wrapped in blue paper. This is what I wanted to show you, he said, handing it to her. It arrived last week. Curious, Eleanor unwrapped the package to find a DVD case. On the cover was a photo of her at the piano during the wedding, her eyes closed in concentration, her hands poised gracefully over the keys. The title read, Eleanor Wright Claire de Lune, A Wedding Performance. Beth's cousin is a videographer, Thomas explained. She recorded your performance and edited it properly. The sound quality is amazing. She did this professionally as a gift to us, Beth added. We've made copies for everyone in the family. Eleanor stared at the case, deeply touched. I don't know what to say. Let's watch it, Lisa suggested eagerly. Thomas inserted the DVD into the player, and they gathered around the television. As the video began to play, Eleanor saw herself approach the piano at the wedding reception. She looked smaller than she remembered, more vulnerable somehow. The camera captured her initial nervousness, the way her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her music. Then she began to play. The sound quality was indeed excellent, capturing not only the notes but the subtle dynamics, the gentle pedaling, the breathing of the piano itself. Eleanor watched, hardly recognizing herself as the woman on screen, her face transforming as she lost herself in the music. The camera panned to show the guests gradually falling silent, their expressions changing from polite interest to genuine emotion. It caught Thomas wiping a tear, Beth leaning against him, their hands intertwined. When the final notes faded and the applause began, the camera returned to Eleanor, capturing her surprise at the response, the shy smile that bloomed across her face as she stood to acknowledge the appreciation. As the video ended, Eleanor realized her cheeks were wet. She hadn't cried when she'd played that day, too focused on the music itself. But watching it now, seeing the effect her playing had on others, moved her deeply. That was beautiful, Mom, Lisa said softly. You have an extraordinary gift, Beth's father added. Thank you for sharing it. Eleanor looked at Thomas, who was watching her with a mixture of pride and love that reminded her painfully of his grandfather. Frank would have been so proud to see this, to know that music still flowed through their family. Would you play something for us now? Beth asked. Something different, perhaps? Eleanor moved to the keyboard and settled herself on the bench. It wasn't her piano at home or the grand at the wedding, but it would do. She thought for a moment, then began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece full of tender melancholy and quiet joy. As she played, she was aware of the small circle of family around her, each connected to her in different ways. This wasn't a performance for strangers. This was music shared with loved ones, as intimate as a conversation. When she finished, Thomas touched her shoulder gently. Grandma, I have something to ask you. She looked up at him questioningly. Beth and I have been talking, he continued, glancing at his wife. We've decided to buy a piano, a real one, not this keyboard. We found a beautiful upright that would fit perfectly in that corner. He gestured across the room, and we were wondering if you might consider teaching again privately. Just one student to start. You? Eleanor asked, surprised. Thomas shook his head, smiling. No, Beth, actually. She's always wanted to learn, and after hearing you play, she can't imagine having any other teacher. Eleanor turned to Beth, who nodded eagerly. I know I'm a bit old to be starting, Beth said, but they say it's never too late, right? Eleanor felt a surge of joy at the thought of passing on her knowledge to someone new, especially someone who would be carrying on the family connection to music. It's definitely never too late, she agreed. I'd be honored to teach you. Later that evening, as Lisa drove her home, Eleanor gazed out at the city lights, reflecting on the unexpected turns her life had taken since that wedding day. "You're quiet," Lisa observed. "Tired?" "No," Eleanor replied. "Just thinking." About? About how life surprises you even when you think all the surprises are behind you. She smiled. "A year ago, I was sure my playing days were over. Now I have students and performances and even a DVD. And a new daughter-in-law to teach," Lisa added. "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "That might be the most precious gift of all." The following Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor arrived early at Harmony House. Roy was arranging sheet music near the register when she entered. "Eleanor, just the person I wanted to see." He held out an envelope. "A gentleman dropped this off for you yesterday." Curious, she opened it to find a note written in careful handwriting. "Dear Mrs. Wright, you won't remember me, but I was at your grandson's wedding. I made an unkind joke when you first sat down at the piano, and later apologized to you. You told me it wasn't too late to make music part of my life again. I wanted you to know that last month, I bought a piano similar to my grandmother's old upright. I've started taking lessons. I'm terrible, but it's bringing back good memories. Thank you for the inspiration. Sincerely, Daniel." Eleanor read the note twice, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. She tucked it carefully into her purse just as her first student of the day arrived, Andrea, the shy teenager who was not so shy anymore, carrying a piece of music she'd composed herself. "Good afternoon, Andrea." Eleanor greeted her with a smile. "What have you brought me today?" As they settled at the piano together, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness. At 78, her life had not narrowed as she had feared it might, but rather expanded in ways she could never have imagined. The music that had been her lifelong companion had returned to her, bringing with it new friendships, new purposes, new joys. And the hands that she had worried were too stiff, too old, too arthritic to play properly, still held magic in them. The magic of connecting hearts through sound, of turning notes on a page into emotions that could silence a room, change a life, bridge generations. Eleanor placed her fingers on the keys beside Andrea's and began to play.